Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hello and welcome to our digital event. This is the New Year, New You Business Revolutions event. I'm Ben Wright, founder and chief innovation officer at Melo, and I will be your host for today. Now, as I'm sure many of you are aware, today is Blue Monday, the day of the year where statistically most people feel at their lowest. You know, the first couple of weeks of the new year, everything's exciting, new possibilities, it could all be different. But generally by this point, it starts to feel like same old, same old. It's the time when motivation dips and good intentions start to fade. Well, we're going to talk today a little about why that happens, but the main goal of our time together is to give you some practical tips about how you can make this year different. Create your own revolution, if you will. Now, today's webinar is one of two halves. First, we'll be exploring the psychology behind behavioural change and how leaders can create and maintain momentum. And to help us unpick that topic, I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Ford, exit partner at Melo. Steve holds a PhD in psychology and works closely with financial planning firms to apply behavioural science in a practical, human way to their exits. In the second half, we're going to shift gear and talk about how to have better conversations and how best to disagree. And for that, I'm joined by Sara, Cooke and Baxter from We Are Brave. Sara and Ree work with leaders and teams to improve the quality of conversations that drive clarity, accountability and results. At We Are Brave, their purpose is to help firms manage difficult conversations through conflict resolution. As I've said before, our goal for today is for you to take away some practical tips that you can use today, tomorrow, to make change stick and have challenging conversations with confidence. We are recording today's session and you'll receive a link to the recording afterwards. Please feel free to share it with anyone who you think might find it useful. A bit of housekeeping before we kick off. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will answer those as we go through the webinar. If there's any we can't get to because of time, we'll send the answers out to those afterwards. And thank you to those who sent questions in ahead of the session. Now, every firm is different, so today we are sharing principles, frameworks and experiences rather than one-size-fits-all advice. If you'd like to explore how these apply specifically to your business, you can get in touch with either Melo or We Are Brave after the session, selecting that option in the post-webinar survey. So with all that done, let us dive in to today. And Steve, I'd like to start with you, please. I'd like to lean on your psychology background to get us going. So can you explain in a little bit of detail just why it's so difficult for us to stick to goals or resolutions?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two ways, Ben. I'll give a generic answer that I guess relates to all of us just in our general life. And then I'm going to give another set of answers related to running a business. And I'm picking three categories to put that answer in: strategy, operations, and personal and team culture. Because typically we also fall over in all those areas and they need to be interdependent to run a successful business. So if we fail in one of those boxes, often it affects the others. But anyway, if I go back to just the generic, it's good old fashioned, let's get fit in January type, or let's get healthy. It falls apart usually because a lot of reasons, but the main ones are simply things usually too vague. So like I said, I just want to be healthy, I just want to get fitter. So it's all a little bit vague without any real way of categorizing it. Or it's too ambitious, right? Going to go to the gym 4 times, going to jog 3 times, and I'm going to make sure I cut out the alcohol. And it's just too big a step. And so you basically get put off in the first place. Another thing that's often actually more subtle and more important is that we define it as an outcome. So I want to lose 20 pounds, for example. But really, the thing that's going to help me lose 20 pounds is maybe walking 10,000 steps or riding my bike for 5 hours a week. So we often describe the outcome, not necessarily the behaviours. And so we're not focused on the drivers of what would personally move us forward. So basically, our goals are usually a little bit poorly framed, and that starts to fall apart right then and there. Second major reason is just a weak execution plan. So typically we go, right, let's get some energy going. Let's get some discipline happening. I'm motivated to do this. I'm great for a day or two, but I'm relying on just the energy. I'm not relying on a process. And so from that point of view, things start to fall away a little bit. I don't track anything. We don't want to track everything ad nauseum because that can get detailed, but if I'm tracking calories or my weight or how many steps I've done, then it gives us a simple way of ticking that off, making sure we've done it. I must admit, I used to cycle a lot, and then I didn't. I went on a cycling trip, drove the van mostly, but after that, I'd broken the back of the cycling. So what I did is asked one of the cycling guys, could I report into him every Sunday, just saying what I did. And so that kind of kept me a little bit accountable to him. And he didn't even have to respond, but it's just one of those ways in which you can track. I think the other one is we often, doesn't really fit into real life. And so we're a bit ambitious. Now, I'm not a morning person, so I'm not going to the gym in the morning, things like that. I'm a coffee person, so I'm not necessarily going to cut back on that massively. So there's just things where your habits and the things that you do and the sequence that you do them because of your work or your lifestyle means it's quite difficult to have that. Last one is poor resilience. So when things go wrong or there's a discontinuity, then sometimes that's when it falls over. Or you tried it, you didn't lose weight in a week and you give up, or you gradually stop focusing on the things that matter. So you don't plan for those sorts of setbacks. You don't have a plan when things aren't going as good. You know, that crops up in life. We want to take opportunities. That sometimes breaks the pattern. All in understand. So, you know, it didn't work. I give up. The one that's probably most important of it is it meaningful? So it's pretty easy to drop stuff that isn't meaningful. If you don't frame it as meaningful in your life, as in, I want to have more energy to go and do more enjoyable things that are outdoors, for example, that's meaning to me, not just I've got to lose weight. They're related, but it gives us some context. So that's just the generic stuff. But if I drive into strategy, operations, and personal, I'll be a bit more brief in this area, but because we'll explore it more as we go through. Strategy to me, and someone asked me this question one day, what is strategy, Steve, and how's it linked to the operations? It's just linked by priorities. We only have so many resources, which is time and money usually. So we can't do everything. So we've got to start making choices about where we lay our bets. But most of the time it falls over because the priorities end up being just a wish list. So they're a long list of things we'd love to do, but they're not really priorities. And we're not really putting our time and our resources enough into those. We've talked about outcomes being a bit vague. Same idea. So quite often we don't define it. We say, well, we want to grow the business, but you don't break that down into how many sales calls have we done or how many digital events have we done, and we're not doing the actions that drive that result. Sometimes they're just unrealistic, so you're not in a position to do a lot of it. A lot of us love what you might call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. I do, because it makes you think differently often, and that can create new ideas that can take you forward more than perhaps incremental. But if you're overzealous about it, you don't break that down, then it can very quickly fall apart. Operations is a little bit more straightforward, and I'm not necessarily an operational person. I've spent most of my time in the other two boxes on this topic, but fundamentally, it's all about designing it and sticking to it. So we have a system or a way of improving your operational execution. If that's not there and not written down and not recorded and not starting to be implemented, then it just starts to fizzle out. If you're going to do a project, then often there's no ownership or tracking, so people just lose sight of what's going on. If there's no regular way of monitoring that, then it just falls by the wayside. I guess sometimes this would have been my mistake. If I was operationally focused, I'd just make it too big, and so I'd get drowned by the day-to-day, and I can't deal with it. The cultural stuff and the team stuff is where the rubber hits the road, because that's where the people are making decisions and behaviours and having the conversations that bring operations and strategy to life. So it relies too much on just people's natural energy. And if that wanes in terms of change, then the change doesn't really start to happen, doesn't fall by the same way. So if the incentives are missing inside, no, look, get those reports out, just get your job done, just get your job done, and we're not able to move into some of the project space, then sometimes we can't make those improvements. And I'll leave it to the two ladies on the call, but the other obvious and most important one is avoiding hard conversations. So if you haven't created a safe environment for people to say and do those things, then you're not necessarily going to get those conversations. And that's where the richness happens. That's where the debate happens. That's where the ideas happen. Instead, you just get compliance, and it doesn't really stick.
Thank you, Steve. That's a nice way of setting the scene for us. And some of the things that you said there, I'm definitely been guilty of in the past. Yeah, certainly, I think if you deviate slightly, so you say, I'm not going to eat chocolate today, and then you have one biscuit, it's like, oh, well, it's done now, I'm going to eat all the biscuits. Yeah. I've kind of fallen into that one in the past before. But I think when it comes to kind of getting goal setting or New Year's resolutions or whatever it is, there's the practical side of not sticking to the goal, in that, you're not going to achieve the outcome that you set out to do so. But I think also if you fail, you flounder, there's kind of a psychological impact to that as well. And I wonder whether you could kind of talk us through that a little bit.
Well, I guess yeah, you don't get the rewards, do you? So you're looking for an outcome that usually has an emotional benefit. So if I do want to get outdoors and experience outdoors and what it brings me emotionally, and I miss out on that reward, then I start also then criticizing myself, don't I? So I start getting hard on myself, saying I'm a bit of a failure, or I'm a bit miserable, or life's not going in the direction I want. So it starts eating away at your self-esteem and your identity, I suppose, and you get frustrated. And so you get a little bit more disillusioned. It doesn't reinforce, I guess, having a go at the situation, changing your habits, and having this success. And so small successes build some momentum, don't they? So you start to get the rewards. Some of the mantras start little, like ridiculously little, and just build up, because it just gives you a little bit of a start, and then you can gradually ease into something. I remember when I was trying to get off 2 sugars in a coffee. It was just like take a little bit out each time till eventually there's none there. Now I can't stand it. So it's just the same idea. But yes, we do miss out on a lot of the psychological benefit. It's the same in business. I mean, yes, we're all there to have a rewarding career, and business owners are there to make money and run a great company. But we're all looking for success. We're all looking for joy of working with other people and doing something that's successful and advancing our careers. Everything's got an emotional benefit that we're forfeiting in practice.
Thanks, Steve. We have had a question come in from a different Steve, not you, Steve, or maybe it is you, Steve. I don't know, in disguise.
No, it's not me.
This Steve says he really struggles with setting resolutions or goals. He never sticks to them and feels rubbish because he's let himself down. What should he be doing differently?
Well, I think there's a good list that keeps it simple. The first one I just mentioned was like start small. If I want to get back into my cycling, let's say a jog. Let's go for 10 minutes. So start small and build up so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. It doesn't, daunt you. It does the repercussions of doing something completely different. Doesn't jar, and so you ease into it. The other one is attach it to an existing routine. So sometimes, like, I don't know, maybe I want to take vitamins or something. So every time I get them first morning coffee, I take the vitamin pill. So you're just embedding it in other processes or other events that you're already trying to do. I guess it's reduced the friction. In my own world, for example, I do like doing weights, trying to keep strong, etc., but dragging my backside to the gym, hard work. So I basically bought a lot of equipment and put it in the garage. So all I have to do is go out there. To be honest, I've got a television there, so I'll put on a podcast or something else and I'll listen to that. And often the podcast is something I've saved. So it's a reward to go into the garage, and all the stuff is there. So I've just tried to reduce as much friction as possible in the process. The opposite, increase the friction for the bad stuff. So, it's like hide the biscuits, Ben, so that they're not tempting. Make it more difficult to do something, put them further, just a lot of little things that just means that the temptation is not as easy. And so you can build in making it just a bit harder. Track it. We talked about that earlier, but just do it simply. Don't overwhelm yourself with a lot of stuff, but do something like that. And as we spoke about in the generic, plan for failure. We're going to have bad days where we don't feel like it. Often it is all right. I'm signing up for an hour of cycling every day, but I don't feel like it, or it's raining. Go for a walk, go for a 10-minute bike ride. Just do something that gets you out the door just to keep the habit, and just say, well, I'm cutting my losses today, but I'm still going to do it. As soon as you decide not to, the temptation is to repeat that process and suddenly realize you've only been half the time, and your habits have slipped away.
I do remember reading, I think Atomic Habits has got some of those things in there. Habit stacking was one that I kind of picked. Like pick something you already do and then bolt on the extra bit on top. And also what really works for me is to make sure if I tend to go for a run first thing in the morning, always get the kit out the night before. So you're not having to wonder, what do I wear? Where is it? Where are you going? So make it easy to kind of push on with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, I am conscious of time, Steve, but there's some absolute pearls of wisdom you drop in here. I think what would be great to move on to is how are positive habits actually formed? What techniques can people do to try and be like, you know what, I'm going to have a go at that? You talked about cycle for 10 minutes, or that should be your goal. And if you go for more, fair enough. But is there any kind of easy, simple top tips you can give to people that will help them stick to what they've set out to achieve?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of them. I think it depends on our area. So, if it is just personal stuff, it's like, how do you reward yourself for the exercise? So ultimately, you want the gains of the outcome itself, but what do you do to make sure that you do reward yourself along the way? I think the other one is often talk to other people about it. A couple of things. One is if you voice it out loud, it tends to make you slightly more committed. But it might mean that, for example, you want to reduce your alcohol intake. So you talk to your partners or your friends about that's what you're trying to do. So they understand and they will support you in I guess, that journey. But I think most of it just comes from consistency. There's no escaping it. And if I'm honest, discipline. So, we've just got to build a consistent system. And eventually your habits start to change. I know now that if I don't get a bike ride, I get very angsty. Whereas before I was just lazy and happy with that. Now it's like I get almost anxiety if I don't get the chance to have a bike ride. So it just ends up becoming a habit where it leaves a gap if you don't do it. And so you've got to do it long enough to establish that. And then I think the emotion kicks in and the continuity is created, that draw for you. And your lifestyle starts to shift. You gradually your lifestyle becomes the habit, not the other way around. I've got to fit this into my lifestyle. It becomes a part. So I usually can get away with a lunchtime bike ride 5 days a week, and then a bit more on the weekend. It's just a habit now, and I try to make sure I prioritize it. That's the key.
Thanks, Steve. And we had another question come in. This one's from Anonymous. We've fallen off track with our goals as we've had other priorities come up. How do we get back on track?
Yeah, well, I think how do you get back on track is defining your priorities. And I think in the whole space of strategy, that's the crux of what you're doing. And what I find in most companies, and I was responsible for strategy in some quite large firms, is they really, really struggle to draw everything back to their strategies and their priorities. Let's not use the word strategy because it's sometimes a bit vague for people. If you just say your priorities, whatever they are, what are they, and how do you draw people back? I read once about the military. The military will go, Ben, you've got to take the beach because we need to get a beachhead there, because you're going to take the right flank and then we're going to take that bridge, and then that's going to mean we can expand around and get the port. So they're layering the idea of what they're asking you to do back up to a higher level set of priorities. So unless you've embedded processes to attract your priorities in your regular meetings and things like that, fair chance it's going to slip. The one thing I would say is the one learning I learned in strategy was that people tend to plan. They want to go, right, here's the sequence of what I want to do versus I've got a vision of where I want to go, and I have to be elastic and I have to be opportunistic. It's okay to change your priorities, which is what this question has basically said. I had these priorities, but then other priorities cropped up that I then redefined my priorities. We didn't call it that. We just said my priorities got, distracted. But the fact is they weren't your priorities in the first place by the sound of it. So you haven't committed to it. There was something else that came up place. This is where the setbacks happens. Maybe there was a firefighting need. Something went wrong. You can't anticipate that. So you had to get onto it and fix it. But now that's absorbed lots of time. Anyway, so the moral of the story is make sure that you've fundamentally got clear choices and that all your behavior and your operational activity is aligned back to that, or you're checking that it's aligned. It's okay to be intentional and go, I'm shifting, and we announce that and we say why we're shifting. That's okay. But if you're unconsciously just drifting away, then you're not really sticking to your priorities. You don't have a process for keeping you on track.
Thanks, Steve. Sometimes, or something that I've used quite successfully with firms is that kind of North Star approach. So you talked about kind of BHAGs earlier on, and it's almost like, what's the long game? Where are we heading? And then rather than it all being minute detail, most decisions are, is it going to get us closer or further away from that kind of end game? And then decisions become a little bit easier along that route. But I do specifically like the idea around this kind of habits rather than willpower. So it's not just it's here are the things that I'm going to change about my life to make it easier to do that or harder to do the bad thing, or put those habits in place.
It takes a process or a system. You can't ignore that, and that's the bedrock. It's not about your willpower or the emotional energy you might create from a team day or something like that. That'll all fades eventually. It's the discipline on the regular activity. One thing and this is one thing I'll say, is that quite often that people spend a lot of time in meetings checking stuff out, but there isn't an agenda. There's no regular agenda. It's not under the topics of your strategy. So people just don't have the discipline even within that of using the time to remind them that these are the things we've got to go through because they matter first, then we'll get to the rest. Everything just starts to drift. So inevitably you need structure. And you need discipline to stick to the structure.
I think something just to close out this section, something I picked up from Tony Robbins, which has always kind of stuck with me, is that he said in one of his events that I was on, people often say, I've tried everything. And he says, okay, list it out. What have you tried? And they've said, well, I really pushed myself not to do it. Okay, what else have you tried? No, just that one. And I've done it 15 times now. And it hasn't worked any of the times.
Yeah.
So it's about maybe thinking of different strategies and, like you said, processes and systems around the back. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. I think we might come back to this a little bit later towards the end of the webinar. Don't forget, if you do have any questions, drop them in the chat and I will pose them to our panelists. Okay, so let's move then on from strategy, goals, into, I think, something which is incredibly important and will impact how well you succeed in life, which is the ability to have difficult, challenging conversations in a positive way. And I think it would be fair to say that lots of people shy away from having those challenging conversations, and things maybe don't go so well as a result of that. So, Sara, Ree, over to you guys. Why don't we have those conversations?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, we talk a lot about myths that we have wrapped up around these conversations, and that, whether they are hard conversations, challenging conversations, difficult conversations, whatever you describe them as, often what they've got at their root is a level of maybe disagreement, maybe something that I'm going to be uncomfortable saying out loud, all those things that kind of, are part of that process. And we talk a lot about myths. And one of the big myths I think that we crack first of all with groups is that conflict and disagreement are not the same thing. People will hear the word disagreement and immediately think conflict, and conflict has a much bigger risk attached to it. Oftentimes conflict has a monetary number attached to it, or it might have a human cost to it. And actually we talk about, if we dial that back and hear disagreement differently, and we don't combine those two things to mean the same thing, but if we hear disagreement as a really skillful, really helpful way of having a conversation, then we're more likely to step in and have the conversation. Now, you need to do stuff around that, which we'll obviously talk about. But actually, if we can separate conflict from disagreement, then we have much more chance of stepping in and maybe even having a go at the conversation. But it's the myths that we tell ourselves around that's really tough sometimes to get out of our heads. So that's our first step: separate conflict from disagreement.
And what is it that we are scared of?
Discomfort, I think. Feeling uncomfortable in a conversation that we have much more invested in, whether that's because I'm talking to my partner about being able to do a bike ride or whatever it is on the weekend, or whether that's talking with my co-founder about decisions we need to take, or whether that's a different point of view that we've got that we need to work through. It's uncomfortable. It's genuinely uncomfortable to sit in a conversation that has some level of disagreement, and we don't want the discomfort. What we want is it to feel easy and for it to feel comfortable, like I'm chatting to my friend down the pub, or I'm just chatting to you about something easy in the meeting that we need to go to. And the point is that discomfort is there. And actually working with that discomfort is the thing that helps us get less scared. But if we try to ignore it and we try to pretend like it's not there, it's going to trip us up. So that kind of Lovey Ajani Jones quote from her TED Talk, which is get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable in that conversation.
And I think a number of people will avoid some of those challenging conversations. Maybe they'll just put them off, or think, you know what, I'm just going to go along with everybody else because I don't want to have that conversation. But realistically, that could have a massive negative impact on outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. I think Ree will probably take that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it is that we overestimate the cost of having these conversations. I think that we hold on to all the things that could go wrong, and we overestimate, how hard it will be to have that discomfort. And I think that we underestimate the huge benefits of having the conversation. And I think, the thing that Steve was saying about, when something is meaningful, when I attach meaning to something, I think it's really important when you are thinking about having these conversations and holding on to, there is gold in having these difficult conversations. There is huge, massive commercial, personal benefits to doing this. If you think about in your own lives, it's often those conversations that you are dreading having It's the ones that you play over and over in your mind and you talk yourself through in the car before you have them. And you're thinking about everything that could go wrong. And you're thinking about, if I say that, then they'll say that. And what we underestimate is actually the huge benefits of, imagine how it might be if we actually have this conversation. And I know in personal life and in professional life, when you get through it, the fact you can actually breathe a bit better, Ben. You might not like everything that gets said. You might not like every decision that gets made, but the fact that it has been voiced and the fact that you are making progress. We talk a lot at We Are Brave about there is this false harmony, if not, Ben. It's like we're all in this corporate theatre and we're just pretending that everything's okay, and it isn't okay. And that has huge emotional, commercial risks and detriment, in our opinion, Ben. So I think absolutely people underestimate the benefit of it and they focus too much on the problems with it. Would be my first thing, Ben.
Yeah, they can. Certainly, I think from my own experience, if you don't voice that stuff, it's kind of like niggling somewhere. And then you're never quite 100% bought into what's happening because you haven't voiced whatever it is you wanted to say. And it might be that the outcome is you voice what you say. The other parties are like, okay, we take it on board, but we're not going to change the plan. And you're like, well, at least I've said my piece, and now we can kind of move on with things. So almost kind of getting a bit of closure from it, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people on this call and watching this, they're making huge decisions, aren't they? And it's really personal business decisions that are happening here. And so I think it's fascinating how many huge decisions get made and people just perform and say that's okay. And then that leaks out everywhere, Ben. We know that. People don't line up to the decision and then that leaks out everywhere. And, we had a great way when we were working before. You had to line up. I might not agree, but you have to line up behind the decision. But there needs to be a conversation about that. Sara and I, we are running this business together and we have to line up behind each other. And so I think that is really, really important. I've got a second point as well. I think people don't know how to do it, Ben. I think that they genuinely, and I hold my hand up here, I wasn't taught how to do this in a productive way. And so people don't know how to do it. They don't know where to start. And they overestimate the cost, and that is a detrimental mix for me. And actually, what we are really passionate about, we spent years trying to work out what are the ingredients of having a really good conversation. And so now what we know is there's a lot to it, Ben. As you can imagine, if you and I are having a huge decision about the future of our business, there's lots of layers to this. What there are, though, is that we know there are some profoundly simple steps that you can put in that will just start you off. It's like Steve said about start simple. There's 5 really profoundly simple things that you can do that if we just did it, life would be so much better professionally and personally. And I think one is about how you start it, Ben. How you actually position the conversation. And I'm going to be bold and I'm going to put one of our steps, which when we first started doing this, absolutely, I could not see how this would work, Ben. This is one that was proposed by Sara, and we actually ironically had a disagreement about it. So this was and this is fascinating for me in terms of if you look at, the first way of setting up a conversation. My approach was always, I've got a thing I want to say. I didn't say it last year. I'm going to say it this year. Go up to the person, call the person and say, I want to talk about the thing and let's have the conversation there and then. Human. I want to rip the plaster off. This is very, very human. But what we do with people is to say to people, hang on, a really important step is if you want to say something, you want to introduce a topic, be clear about the topic and say, I want to have the conversation. Can we set a time to have the conversation? So you do not have the conversation there and then. And people say to me, oh, what about this? And I get it completely. What I'm not saying is say to somebody, let's have the conversation and then leave that person hanging for a week. That's going to, anxiety inducing personally for some people as well. It might just be 10 minutes that we go, look, this is what we're going to talk about. Both of us take some time to think about it and then we will come back because we often introduce it, run at it. I'm not at my best and the other person isn't at their best. And that gets even, that gets bigger when I'm working around a table with people. So that is something that most people go, really, I don't like that. And I'm going to say that can be a game changer. That can be an absolute game changer. Have you got any questions to me on that, Ben? Because I can see you nodding, but that's a little bit different to the normal approach. So
it is, and I'm just taking that in. I suppose I'm thinking my natural tendency would be like, right, we need to jump in. We just need to get this fixed. Let's just go fix it. So I'm probably in the guilty camp on that one, in that I would just jump in and try and have the call now. Let's just gonna get it done. But you think that postponing, that waiting, that setting a time makes it more intentional to, you can come ready almost.
Absolutely. I think you come ready and they come ready. Now there's a structure and we're going to talk you through that. Absolutely. Yeah. There's more steps to this. There is absolutely that little break. It can be 5 minutes, but it is enough for that other person to just go, okay, this is a topic, and also get some preparation.
Yeah.
You know, you might, when you go jumping in, you're not at your best. And also they're not at their best. And actually we want healthy, I want people to disagree with me back, Ben. Because if not, I get that performative false harmony that we're talking about. So that even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's half an hour, that break can be really, really powerful. And people will go, and I'm guilty. They'll go, but really, let's just do it now. And it's holding your ground and go, I know that's how we normally do it. I truly believe we'll have a more productive conversation if we take 5 minutes. You think about your perspective, I'll think about mine, and then let's come back and have that conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Ree. We've got a few questions. A couple were sent in beforehand, and a couple are now jumped upon the chat as well. So if I can just pose a couple of questions for you. The first one, I think, probably more of a comment maybe than a question. Paul sent in that I think sometimes he said that a big fear is humiliation. Maybe that you go in with a specific point of view, and then by the end you've changed your mind, and that's a bit of a humiliating thing potentially. Do you guys see that as a regular occurrence?
I think, Paul, that's a really interesting. I'll take this, Ree. Clearly, I've started talking, so there is a way of thinking about your point of view. I think if we're talking about disagreements, the purpose of disagreement is to come out with a solution that might be, or an answer, or a decision, or whatever it might, a changed point of view that is a fuller, better, more informed. We talk about well-formed, well-informed conversations. And I think strong opinions loosely held is the way that we think about going into conversations. That's definitely not my phrase. That's a Glennon Doyle phrase. But strong opinions loosely held means that I go in with, as Paul was saying, a really clear point of view, and I know my own mind. I've taken some time, like Ree said, to think about it. I've taken some time to come in so I'm clear, but I'm willing within that conversation to find a place that is maybe different. And it could be that you change your mind, but the process of the disagreement is there to help you change your mind, not to have been beaten down into a different point of view. I think there's a difference there, and I don't know the nuance that maybe Paul is coming in with, but I think if you're both coming in with a healthy perspective of let's get a better outcome, if Ree's point of view in a conversation is a better outcome, great, it's a better outcome for my business. That's brilliant. How can that be? How can that be anything other than good? But yeah, strong opinions loosely held is the place that we would start from, because then it's not humiliation, it's more informed, better informed as a result. So I don't know if that helps, Paul.
I think it certainly rings true that if you go in like, I'm going to force this down other people's throat, it's generally not a great place to be for either person. It's more like I think this because it's for the benefit of whatever we're trying to achieve together. So I'd like to tell you about why I think it's of the benefit. And actually the other points may well outweigh your view on that, and it could change your mind. And that's okay. It's okay to change your mind on stuff, I think.
Yeah, it is. Go on, Ree.
Go ahead, Sarah. I was just going to chip in. I think that the other thing that we do is that in our 5 minutes when we're preparing, we can fall into two camps. We can over prepare or we can under prepare. We can walk straight in and go, well, I'm not really going to do anything in these 5 minutes, and I'll just, abdicate responsibility. Some of us, putting our hand up, will want to over control, and we'll have like our entire, we talk about corporate theatre, have our entire script ready to go. If they say that, I will say that back. And then if they dare say that to me, I will say that back. It's all very human. When Steve's saying about humiliation, this is human. We are amazing decision-making machines who get in our way sometimes. And so what we will say is when you're preparing, our big tip is write it down, helps with the adrenaline. Also, only get your initial view, Ben, get your initial perspective. Think of it as like your opening statement. Because as you can imagine, a big thing of this is that we want to hear the other person. So walk in with your initial perspective your initial 1 minute, 2 minutes. Because if not is a script, and you are not then listening, you are not present, you are not participating, it's not a conversation. So I think absolutely, this thing about people have this fear that they've got to have everything, they need to know everything they need to say, and if that happens, then they'll do this. Let go of that. Get your opening perspective. It's really powerful. Find the joy in that.
Thank you. So we've had another couple of questions that were submitted before, and the first one's from Anonymous. I don't want to speak up because I'm scared of their reaction. Is this normal?
Yeah, hugely so. Well, Ria sort of alluded to it there a little bit in our kind of preparation. If we're heading into a conversation that is a little bit more, I don't know, tense, if you want to use the word, harder, maybe there's going to be some disagreement, whatever your language is. We talk about disagreement as the word that we describe it as. It's really easy for us to over prepare and think, well, actually, if I say this, then I won't get that reaction. Or if I say it, I'll get that reaction, but I'll handle it like this. And there is a little bit of leaning into structure here. Steve mentioned it earlier, but structure, discipline, and skill are the three things we tell people all the time. And the point is, when we go into disagreement, we are going to get uncomfortable because we are in disagreement. So therefore, there is going to be a reaction that perhaps we are less comfortable with handling. And everyone handles reactions differently. Some people, it's tears is difficult to handle. Aggression is more difficult to handle. There's a spectrum of people's responses that will come back at us. But actually, if we lean on structure in the conversation, which we build with a group very clearly around this is through the conversation, because we're not chatting with our friends down the pub, because we're not just sitting there having a wide-ranging conversation, when we talk people through how to have these conversations, there's a structure to it. And the first step is to see the first few minutes as fact-finding only. So you're not into that tennis back and forth. So therefore, I'm not into this kind of potential reaction. The first couple of minutes is I'm going to say what I'm thinking without interruption. Just listen. And then I will do the same for you. I will listen to you without interruption. And then we know what's on the table, and then we can try and figure it out. And so reducing the risk of that kind of almost emotional tennis that can come back and forth, the reactions that can come back and forth. No, we're not going to do that yet. We're going to spend 4 or 5 minutes just getting everything that we need to know on the table as such. And so that really helps. But it is uncomfortable. So if we can get rid of this myth that difficult conversations are supposed to be comfortable, then we can start to almost move into the conversation more easily, because we're going to get a reaction, and it's okay. We can't control anyone's reaction other than our own. And so that's really critical for us. So just see it as fact finding to start with, and that structure will help us move through in a calmer way. Still uncomfortable, but calmer as a result.
Thanks, Sara. And another question from Paul coming in. The difference between doing it on a one-to-one basis and in a group conversation. So what would your tips be around if you're trying to have a constructive conversation with an individual versus in a group of people?
Ree, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I will. I think, first of all, make sure that you are really clear about, should this be one-to-one or should it be a group? I think sometimes those things, we don't make great decisions about that sometimes. And also, that there are certain people that it would work better if I had that conversation one-to-one rather than a group. So I think I think sometimes we're not conscious. Steve used that word earlier about making sure we're conscious, or maybe it was you, Ben. I think that structure even more, Ben, for me, when there's more voices, and it is more disciplined. It is even more disciplined. And it's often, Steve said about having an agenda. Also for us, when we work with people, there are roles. Everybody has a role in terms of not their role at the company, their role in a meeting. Your role is to make sure everyone is spoken. Somebody else's role will be making sure and just looking out for, there's stuff we're not talking about. So we assign different roles that run in parallel. So there's lots and lots to this, but absolutely everybody needs to speak, and discipline is key when you're looking at a group. So that would be my first sort of tips. Starting simply, that would be my big first tips.
I think those group discussions are possibly more of the, well, I say more challenging. Actually, one-to-one can be more challenging, really, can't it? Because it's just direct you and me having a different point of view on things. But I know certainly in that group setting, you will have different people who will look at the world a different way. Some will be more like on the front foot, some will be more reflective, some will be more action oriented. And trying to control that dynamic can be a little bit challenging potentially.
I think I'll add to this as well. I think when it comes to disagreement, when it comes to different points of view, if you're in a group, what we often observe is that nobody gets curious. Nobody gets curious. What everybody's doing is throwing opinions back and forth. And that's true in a one-to-one situation as well, but it's more easy to contain because there's only two voices going on. But if you've got a group of, I don't know, 6 or 8 people, everybody's wanting to say something, nobody's wanting to listen, and nobody's wanting to get curious about what they've just heard. So you end up with this sort of almost like frisbeeing back and forth, and nobody's catching the frisbee. Everyone's just missing it, and then, kind of putting their contribution in. And so the curiosity is there. And also, like Ree said, we sort of give people roles to think about, but also saying out loud, being the voice that says out loud, I think we're ignoring each other. I think no one's listening in this room. I think this is getting difficult, and nobody has said that it's getting difficult. And so being the voice that is brave enough to voice what's going on underneath the conversation is the thing. And in disagreement or difficult conversations or uncomfortable conversations, that's the stuff that breaks the tension. That's the stuff that shifts people forward, because everyone go, oh, okay, yeah, right, great. Let's take a coffee break. Let's take 2 minutes, come back and actually figure out what we've got. And so I think that for us is a big thing with a group. It's the voicing what's going on underneath the actual topic is a really key thing, but being brave enough to do that and giving people language to do it as well. Just say, oh, I think this is getting difficult. I think we should stop for 2 minutes is a really big thing.
I love that. I really like the idea of calling out to say, this is starting to get a little bit tense. Why don't we have a break for 5 minutes? Or because everyone will be feeling it, won't they? It's just that someone needs to actually just say it. Yeah.
Or if you've got the person in the room that isn't feeling it, that is dominating, that is driving that discomfort, what you do is you break that process anyway. So it's, it works both ways for people that are feeling uncomfortable or for those who are oblivious that they are causing the discomfort as well. So it works for both in that way. So yeah.
Thanks, Sara. And now I'm really conscious that you guys have got an amazing framework in how to have better conversations. But just before we jump into that, one more question. What would your advice be to someone who's more of a reflector? So they take a piece of information, they like to go away, think about it, and then come back after they've thought about it. How would that work if you're in this kind of environment where you're having a challenging conversation and maybe the person you're talking to isn't a reflector? They're quite an action-oriented person. They want to just get on, make the decision and push through. What would your advice be there?
I'll take that. I think the thing for me is that making sure that you are really clear about having that pause with when the conversation happens, Ben, not letting that conflate and happen at the same time. I think also it is a lot of this for me is about saying out loud the thing that is going through your mind in the most appropriate way that you can, Ben. You're clear, but there is something about when you're reflective, having a phrase that is your go-to, which is, I need some time to think about that. I need to take some time now. So I'd like us to have, and if you know that you're with somebody who has a low tolerance for, time, or might be extremely busy, and, you've got to make sure that you're, making sure you see that value. Even it is absolutely, as Sara said, I need to take a 2-minute break. I need to reflect on that. We work a lot with people to be able to speak up and voice their needs then. And I think that often people say, and I use a phrase, which is, I will get a much better answer for you if I have 2 minutes to be able to reflect. So if I've got somebody in front of me who is time is money, which I get, I will get you a better answer if you give me 2 minutes to reflect. That for me it's the language that we use, and being okay with that, reflection, that quiet power, there's that amazing person that's written the book about quiet power. Reflection, I think we don't see reflection as a quiet power. It's an amazing power. And so standing up for that and articulating that is really important for me.
I like that. And maybe even setting out in advance to the person that you're talking to say, look, I'm a reflector. There's a good chance that after we've kind of brought out the bones of this, I'm going to need to have a think about it. So just so you know.
Yeah, I'm going to add as well, actually, because, Ree and I, our dynamic is very much different in terms of that reflection and, need to voice everything. And often it's really the responsibility as well for the person who's a little bit less reflective to know when they are just voicing out loud some thoughts and the other person doesn't need to pay attention to them for a bit. Ree and I, we've got our own phrase, and I'll say, let me go for a dance around this. I need to just kind of hear it out loud. And so that's Ree's cue to go, okay, I don't need to listen for a bit. She'll come back. And I think that self-awareness in groups or in one-to-one is really important, because then we can have a moment of not having to listen to everything that comes out. So I think there's two-way there. It's both parties being involved in that.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And now let's get to the good stuff on this one. So people want to have better conversations. What's the plan? And you've got a brilliant framework for this. Would you mind kind of talking through it for our viewers, listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of this has already come out when we talk about the questions, which has been beautiful because you've kind of lined us up for that, everybody. But absolutely, in terms of, these are the 5 profoundly steps. There are more, layers and levers in this, but let's look at those 5 profound steps. So let's just recap in terms of introduce the topic clearly. Do not have the conversation there and then. Step 1. Step 2, take your time, even if it's your 5 minutes, to get your opening perspective, each of you, or if it's a group, all of you. But getting your initial perspective, holding those ideas firmly, but not completely, that you're not going to change. So in other words, you're taking in your opening perspective, not a script. Absolutely. In terms of step 3, I'll come to you, Sara. I know we've talked about step 3, but I'll let you take that one for us, please.
Yeah, I think it's the thing that we said at the start, which is we're not doing that tennis. What we're doing is we're taking time at the start, and 2-3 minutes is all you need each to place what it is that you have a position on into the conversation, and it is fact finding only. So I'm not looking to bat back. I'm not looking to question. I'm not looking to disagree. I am looking to hear and understand where your position is. I might not agree with you, but to start with, I'm going to hear it. So step 3 is all about fact finding. And then what we talk about in step 4, when we need to get into the grit of actually, no, we don't agree, is get curious first. Get curious first. Ask the question first. Don't go straight into defending your position. Strong opinions loosely held. It can be scary, so switch off the fear in our brain by using curiosity. They don't sit together at the same time. So if you're asking a question, you are less likely to be worried about the discomfort that you're feeling. So get curious is definitely our 4th step. That helps with the disagreement. It helps get that moving through. And then the last one is, if you're making a decision, just take the first step. We talk all about brave decisions, and progress come from that first small step. So don't think about, Steve said this earlier, don't think about huge decisions. Think about what's the first thing we're going to do? What's the right thing that comes next to do? And just commit to that, line up behind it, as Ree said earlier. So those 5 things move people through. Having that structure in your head moves you through the conversation that will be a little bit more uncomfortable than just having a chat with your friends.
Thank you ever so much. It seems really clear when you lay it out like that. It just seems sensible and straightforward. And I think back to kind of Steve's points earlier, sometimes if you have a process, things become easier because you follow in the process. The next thing is, I'm going to do this, and you're prepared for it and you're ready for it, rather than just saying, oh, I'm going to try really hard to have a difficult conversation with somebody. Yeah. You've got that kind of, you've set yourself up by having that process ready to go. Super important question, I think. What happens if the other person doesn't want to engage, or is just like, we're going to do this now and then we're going to decide and that's it, there's no time to think about it, we just got to make a decision and push on? How would someone best deal with that situation?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think we've talked about when somebody wants to push on and they won't let you reflect and they want to make the decision fast and standing your ground for that. I think it's fascinating. It comes up a lot when something is important to you, but it isn't important to the other person. And we have this between us as co-founders in this company, is that there are things that will be important to me and they are less important to Sara. And so I think when you're taking a topic, it is down to you to say, I want to talk about this. It is really important. This to me is really important. It might not be as important to you, but it is really important to me. And when somebody can't see the benefits, there's a quick look. I think this is going to save us money, all of those things in terms of giving them a quick snapshot. I think this is going to get in the way of our company if we don't have this conversation. So telling them the danger. So actually highlighting that when you're introducing the topic, for me, I think that's really, really, really important. I think there's also that curiosity, because sometimes people will agree to have the conversation with you, Ben, but they're kind of like, I still don't think it's that important. And they don't prepare. And then for me, that's me saying, I need us to get both of our views. So let's take 5 minutes to get our views and come back in. So actually calling that out if somebody is not ready. I also think when somebody is kind of half going through the conversation, that curiosity is really important for me. Asking the question, this is important to me. Why is it less important to you? Actually being brave enough to say, why is this lower down on your priorities, to use the key word that Steve said? Why is this less of a priority for you? We often don't have that type of conversation. I've had it with Sara, where Sara will go, well, it's less of a priority because of this, this, and this. And I'll go, oh, you're so right. The thing that I've been, awake up at night about is actually, that I thought was so important, but actually asking the question, why is this less important to you? Can be really, really powerful. It can be a door opener, that one, Ben.
Amazing. Thank you both. And just to kind of, I suppose, to wrap up, when we were talking before here, we talked about a great reflective question for people to ask themselves. Who wants to volunteer it up? Oh no, you don't remember. Okay, so I thought it was a great question. But anyway,
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. So we kind of talk about reflecting back over the year and what's happened. And something that certainly was really beneficial for me, actually, at the end of last year, because there were a number of ups and downs, kind of, I suppose it's a roller coaster of life, isn't it? It was nice just to reflect on some of the great stuff that had happened and go back over that and think, oh yeah, that was good. Oh yeah, that was great. But it made me think about, people have said before, what do you want written on your tombstone? What do you want at your eulogy? And what one of you said, Rio, Sara, I can't remember which one said it was, for people to reflect on themselves. What difficult conversations do you wish you'd had last year, and how can you make it different this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I now know the question. Thank you, Ben. That's great. I think, yes, because we talk about new year, new you. There's a mantra in that. And what we wanted to kind of position this with, which is, well, there's no new you. It's just, what's the stuff that you would like to make sure at the end of this year that you're not looking back on thinking, oh, I could have had that conversation. I wish I had said those words. And I think, yeah, that's for us is the critical thing. The beating heart of what we do at We Are Brave is getting people comfortable with the discomfort and getting people to bring back disagreement, really healthy, well-formed disagreement, because the end of that means, wow, look at what I did do this year. Look at those conversations I did have that I was terrified of the year before, but actually they weren't so scary. And guess what? The more we do them, just like habits, the more we do them, the less scary they become. And actually with groups, sometimes they say to us, we don't really see it as disagreement anymore. We don't even call it that anymore. It's just the way that we do meetings, or it's the way we do conversations. And people are often saying to us, well, we just have brave conversations now rather than disagreement, which is really great. But yeah, you're absolutely right. What are all the conversations you wish you'd had last year that you would like to have this year? And that's, yeah, a nice way of starting the year.
And maybe write those down in a big list and then make a point of actually creating a situation that you can actually go and have those conversations, perhaps.
Yeah, and start with the ones that are less scary first. Like everything, start with the ones that you think I'm going to get less pushback on, so I can really feel that I've achieved it and done it. And then I can get to the bigger ones if that's the case. So yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Thank you. And Steve, you've been quiet for a very long time. Thank you. But just to come back to the stuff you were talking about earlier, if you were going to give someone your top tips for how to set themselves up for success this year, to actually stick to those habits, to make a real change in their life, what would be your kind of 2 or 3 top tips?
Well, people probably find them a bit boring, but like we said, it's regular checks and balance, or checkpoints, if that makes sense, to draw you back to priorities. Number 1, adapt, not necessarily plan. So if things go awry, be resilient about how you roll with the punches, but do it intentionally. And the last one, which, whatever domain you're in, sometimes just you have to be disciplined, and you've got to make regular daily choices about, when you don't really feel like doing something, sometimes you just have to try and exert a little bit of discipline until it becomes consistent and a habit. And then usually your emotional alignment falls into place.
Sounds perfect. We had an interesting, a good observation coming from Sherry Ann actually on the Q&A, to say that being able to have brave conversations is actually great for financial planners and their clients as well. Yeah. Because sometimes the client's like, oh no, don't need to worry about that stuff. And it's the advisor's job to say, well, actually, we need to have a chat about that because that is going to have implications down the line. So being able to have those brave conversations
if
too.
I could just add one thing to what the lady said, I think one of the worst habits is people go in with a right or wrong mentality. Someone's right and someone's wrong. And if you go in with that mentality, the whole thing starts to go awry very, very quickly. So to me, just drop the idea of being right and wrong and look for solutions.
I love the idea of fact-finding. That the start of the conversation is that fact-finding piece. What do you know that I don't? Let's pool our wisdom, and then maybe we see this differently. And actually, there isn't any disagreement at all.
Yeah, that's strange, actually. Sometimes that does happen. It is that, like we're saying, that strong opinions loosely held means I can put them in front of us in that fact-finding process and go, oh, we're not that far off. What sometimes happens is people are describing things differently, different language. But they're sometimes describing the same thing. Not always, let's be clear. But sometimes it's, so we are actually in agreement on that, not disagreement. That's interesting. So yeah, great.
Perfect. Well, that's about all we've got time for today. A massive thank you to Ree and Sara from We Are Brave, and obviously our very own Dr. Stephen Ford from Melo. I hope today's webinar gave you a few ideas that you can implement right away. That was what we were going for, is stuff that you can just get on and do, which will make your life better. If you do want to have a chat with either Melo or We Are Brave, just make a note of that in the post-event feedback and we will be in touch to arrange that conversation. Today's webinar has been recorded and we will send you out the recording so you can rewatch any bits you want to revisit. Or if there's anybody else that you think would benefit, please do feel free to share it with them. We've got loads of exciting digital and physical events coming up this year, so feel free to check out melo.co.uk, our events section, for what's happening, or just keep tuned to our LinkedIn channel. But yeah, thank you again for watching, and I hope you all have an amazing start to your 2026 with great goals, great plans to achieve those goals, and brilliant conversations that make life meaningful. Thanks, everyone.